John had barely stepped off the plane when the weight of the years he had lived began to weigh him down. Each step through the airport seemed harder, as if he were carrying more than just suitcases. His mind was busy, wandering through memories of a luxurious life he had built in New York, but which now seemed empty and meaningless. When he reached the arrivals area, an unexpected sight made his heart race. Sarah, the woman he had abandoned 15 years ago, was there, accompanied by a young woman who looked like a younger version of himself. John stopped, shock paralyzing him. His eyes followed the two women as they walked through the crowd. Sarah looked almost the same, except for the tired and firm expression he didn't recognize. The young woman beside him? There was no doubt, she could only be his daughter. Regret and guilt began to suffocate him, as he tried to understand what was happening. Before he could react, Sarah and the girl disappeared into the sea of people, leaving John with an even greater sense of loss. He knew he had to find them. Suddenly, all the decisions he had made, trading the love of his life for wealth and success, seemed like the worst mistake ever. Now he had a chance to make things right, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. The airport was crowded and John felt lost, both physically and emotionally. Memories of his youth with Sarah began to flood his mind. They had dreamed of building a life together, but his ambition had led him astray. Seeing Sarah and the young woman he believed to be his daughter made John realize how deeply his choices had hurt them. The sound of the loudspeakers announcing arrivals and departures seemed distant as John struggled to make his way through the crowd. He made his way toward the baggage claim area, hoping to find some clue. Every step was a reminder of his determination to make amends. He approached a security guard, describing Sarah and the young woman in the hopes that someone had seen them. "I'm sorry, sir," the security guard replied sympathetically. "The airport is very busy today, it's hard to track anyone without more information." John thanked her and continued his search, his eyes scanning each unfamiliar face, as he realized that he no longer knew anything about Sarah's life. While pursuing his selfish dreams, John sat in an airport cafe, lost in thought. He clearly remembered the day he told Sarah about his decision to leave for New York. She begged him to stay, but the idea of making a fortune blinded him. The farewell was painful, full of broken promises and broken hearts. John did not know that, by leaving, he left Sarah with a secret that would change their lives forever. In the years that followed, he achieved everything he wanted: financial success, glamorous parties, and many relationships, but all of them empty. Despite having achieved what he so longed for, loneliness always accompanied him. Meanwhile, Sarah faced a very different battle, raising alone the daughter that John did not even know existed. He never imagined how much his departure would leave so many scars. Now, sitting in that coffee shop, the weight of his choices finally hit him. John knew he had to find Sarah and the young woman he had barely glimpsed at the airport, who he believed was his daughter. His thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and hope. What if they didn't want to see him? What if it was too late to apologize? Regret burned in his soul, but he was determined to make amends. Determined, John decided to revisit the important places of his past with Sarah, hoping to find some clue about his current life. From the park where they spent their afternoons to the old house where they lived, each place brought back painful memories and a sense of loss. In each corner, he reflected on the devastating impact his departure had had on Sarah's life. While he lived in the glamour and euphoria of his new life in New York, Sarah silently faced the struggle of raising a daughter alone. He finally understood the extent of his failures and knew that it would take more than luck to find them again. With a heavy heart but determination, John prepared himself to face the consequences of his past actions. He knew that it would not be easy to regain the love and trust of Sarah and her daughter. Determined to right his wrongs, John decided he needed professional help. He hired a private detective who specialized in locating missing persons. The frantic search began. John was willing to pay any price to find his family again and, this time, do things the right way. The detective began to comb through public records in search of any clue that would lead to Sarah and her daughter. Meanwhile, John revisited places that marked his past with Sarah. He walked through the park where they used to spend their afternoons, sat on the same benches where they talked about the future, and even returned to the old house where they lived. Each place brought back painful memories, a sense of profound loss, and a clear vision of the scars he left behind when he left. The detective, in turn, managed to locate old friends of Sarah, people who still remembered her and knew where she might be. Excited, John accompanied the detective on every visit, eager to hear any information that would help him find Sarah and her daughter. During one of these visits, they met a longtime friend who revealed a crucial clue. Sarah had moved to a nearby neighborhood a few years ago and was rebuilding her life with her daughter Emily, who was now a promising young woman but was facing health problems. Hearing about Emily's health problems, John's heart sank. The detective, more determined than ever, followed the new leads with even greater focus, while John felt that he was getting closer and closer to finding his family. However, with each step, the awareness of the challenge grew. He knew that it would not be easy to regain their trust. In addition to the search, John faced his own demons. Guilt and regret were his constant companions, reminding him of the choices he had made and the price he had paid. He knew that when he finally found Sarah and Emily, he would have to deal not only with their anger and resentment, but also with his own feelings of inadequacy and guilt. After weeks of tireless searching, the detective finally found a solid clue: Sarah's current address. With his heart racing, John prepared himself for the reunion, knowing that he would have to face the consequences of his actions and find a way to regain the love and trust he had lost. John stopped in front of the modest house the detective had indicated, his heart racing and his breath shallow. He tried to calm himself, but each step toward the door seemed to weigh a ton. The moment he had both longed for and feared was about to happen. When he reached the door, he hesitated for a second, the sound of the doorbell echoing inside the house. He heard footsteps approaching, and when the door slowly opened, there was Sarah. The two stood still, staring at each other in silence. Sarah's gaze was a mixture of surprise, caution, and pain. John finally broke the silence, his voice wavering. "Sarah," she answered, her voice thick with emotion. "You needed to find out what you needed, John." Her words were cut off by the pain that turned to anger. "You left us. You left me alone." Sarah's words hit John like a punch. "I know I made a terrible mistake, Sarah. But I'm here now, I want to make things right." Before he could continue, a young woman appeared in the hallway. It was Emily, and the resemblance to John was undeniable. She looked at the scene, confused. "Who is this, Mom?" she asked, the suspicion evident in her voice. John looked at Sarah, trying to understand. With tears in her eyes, Sarah answered, "He's your father, Emily." Shock ran through John's body. "My daughter. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Sarah shook her head, fighting back tears. "You left us, John. I was alone, scared. And you never came back." The pain was palpable in Sarah's words, and John felt the deep impact in his chest. Emily, her face grim and her arms crossed, finally spoke, her tone thick with resentment. "My father? The man who abandoned us? Do you think you can just come back and everything will be okay? You don't know anything about me." John took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, Emily. But I'm here now, willing to fix what I've done." Emily looked at him coldly, her eyes hard as stone. "Do you think it's that simple? Come back after all these years and expect everything to be resolved? You don't know anything about me or our lives." John took another deep breath, knowing that regaining their trust would be the hardest task of his life. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to be a part of your future. I want to be a father to you," John said, his voice full of regret. But Sarah, her eyes still wet, interrupted him. "John, you can't just show up and expect everything to be okay. It's been years of struggle. I had to be strong on my own, and you weren't there." John nodded, acknowledging the painful truth. "I know, Sarah, and I'm sorry. I really am. But I'm here now and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I've changed." The tension in the air was palpable. Emily, still firm, looked at her mother and said, "I don't have a father, I never did, and I won't have one now." With that, she turned and slammed the door, locking herself in the room. Sarah, her eyes full of tears, sighed deeply and looked at John. "Come in, John. We need to talk." He walked in, feeling the weight of the moment. The room was simple but welcoming, full of signs of a life lived with hardships but also with love. He sat on the couch, while Sarah settled into an armchair opposite him. "She's going through a lot, John," Sarah began, trying to find the right words. John, concerned, asked, "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated, but soon decided to speak frankly. "She's having a lot of problems at school. She feels abandoned, and it's affecting her behavior and her grades. She misses you, even if she won't admit it." John felt a wave of guilt. "If I had known this before, I would have come back sooner." Sarah shook her head. "That's only part of the problem. Emily is sick too, John. She has a serious condition and needs constant treatment." John's heart sank. "How can I help?" Sarah sighed deeply before answering, "She has an autoimmune disease. She needs expensive medications and constant care. I'm doing my best, but it's not easy." John felt the need to act. "Let me help, Sarah. I can pay for her treatment. I want to be a part of your lives and help in any way I can." Sarah looked at John, pain and exhaustion in her eyes. "It's not that simple, John. Emily won't accept your help so easily. She's hurt by you, and to be honest, so am I." John took a deep breath. "I understand how deeply you feel, Sarah. I know I need to earn your trust, but please let me help with Emily's treatment. It's the least I can do." At that moment, Emily appeared in the doorway, tears in her eyes and full of anger. "We don't need you," she said firmly. "We've gotten this far on our own. You can't just show up and try to fix everything with money." John took a step toward her, but Emily backed away. "Emily, I know you have every right to be mad at me, but I just want to help." She crossed her arms, keeping her distance. "Money won't fix everything, John. You weren't here when we needed you the most. It's too late now." Emily's words hit John like a punch, but he stood his ground. "I can't change the past, but I'm here now. Please let me help." Sarah put her hand on her daughter's shoulder and looked at John. "We'll find a way for you to help, but it will be on our terms, in our time." John nodded, understanding that there was still a long way to go. "Okay. I'll do whatever it takes. I just want the best for Emily and for you, Sarah." She looked at him with a mix of hope and skepticism in her eyes. "We'll see how things go, but know that it will be a slow process." John accepted, determined to prove that he was here to stay, willing to face all challenges to regain the trust and love of his family. In the days that followed, he continued to visit Sarah and Emily, trying to get closer little by little. He realized that, despite their resistance, there was a small opening for him to become a part of their lives. One Sunday morning, Sarah invited him to go to church with them. John hesitated for a moment, but accepted, curious to understand what gave Sarah the strength to keep going. When they arrived, they were warmly welcomed by the community. The church was simple, but full of positive energy. People greeted Sarah and Emily with affection, demonstrating a strong sense of community and support. The service was led by Pastor Marcos, a middle-aged man with a serene and welcoming countenance. During the sermon, John watched Sarah find comfort in the words of faith and hope, which the pastor also spoke to Emily. Still hurting, but seeking some kind of relief, John tried to connect in some way. After the service, Pastor Mark approached Sarah and greeted her warmly. "Sarah, it's always a pleasure to see you here. And this must be John," he said, extending his hand. "Yes, Pastor Mark, this is John," Sarah replied. "John, this is Pastor Mark, our friend and spiritual advisor." John shook the pastor's hand, feeling a surge of respect for the man who had clearly had a profound impact on Sarah and Amelie's lives. "Nice to meet you, Pastor Mark," John said, trying to hide his eagerness. "John, I heard you're coming back into Sarah and Amelie's lives. It won't be easy, but I'm here to help in any way I can," the pastor said with a gentle smile. John felt a little relieved. "Thank you, Pastor. I know I have a long way to go to regain their trust," John replied. Pastor Marcos invited John to sit on a bench in the church garden, where they could talk more calmly. John listened as the pastor explained that faith had been an important refuge for Sarah. When John left them, they found fundamental support in the church and in the community. Sarah, in particular, made friends there who helped her through the most difficult times. Even for Amelie, despite her resistance, that community had been a pillar of support. John reflected on the pastor's words, but felt the need to be honest. "Pastor, I don't know if I can believe. I've always been someone who believes in what I can see and touch. For me, success and material achievements were all that made sense. I don't know if I can believe in anything greater." Pastor Marcos smiled understandingly. "I understand, John. Faith is a personal journey, and not everyone is ready to follow it in the same way. The fact that you are here, trying to understand, is already a big step." John felt a mix of relief and internal conflict. "I want to help Sarah and Amelie, but I'm not sure I can do it through faith." "You can help in many ways, John. The community is here to support you, and your presence already means a lot. Keep trying, even if it's in your own way," the pastor advised. The next day, Amelie sat in the back row of the classroom, staring out the window, oblivious to her math lesson. John's arrival had shaken up her already complicated life even more. The anger and pain she felt toward him made it difficult to concentrate. She had always been a dedicated student, but the last few months had been especially difficult. At school, Amelie faced constant challenges. Her classmates saw her as the girl with an absent father and a worried mother. She felt isolated and misunderstood, and every snide comment or pitying look only increased her frustration and worsened her already fragile health. Amelie's routine was becoming increasingly complicated. Constant medical treatments and frequent trips to the hospital made her miss a lot of classes, which only worsened her situation at school. Things weren't easy at home either. Sarah tried to keep everything under control, but John's presence created visible tension. Amelie avoided any contact with him, remaining distant and cold. The pain of abandonment was still strong, and she couldn't forgive him for leaving her mother alone with all the responsibilities. John, on the other hand, did everything he could to get closer. He tried to talk to Amelie, showing interest in her activities, but he only received silence or short answers. Each. The failed attempt at connection increased his determination, but also his despair. He knew it would take a lot of time and patience to gain his daughter's trust. One night, Amelie locked herself in her room, crying. She was exhausted by everything, her illness, her problems at school, and her father's sudden return. Sarah, worried, went to the bedroom door, trying to comfort her. "Amelie, honey, I know it's hard, but you have to give your dad a chance." "He's trying," Sarah said in a soft, loving voice. "He left us, Mom. He doesn't care. Now he thinks he can come back and fix everything." "I don't want that," Amelie replied through tears. In the hallway, John listened to the conversation, feeling even more helpless. He desperately wanted to fix things, but he knew that words wouldn't be enough. He would have to prove, with consistent actions, that he was truly committed to being a present father. As he struggled with his own feelings of guilt and regret, John knew that Amelie was also struggling with her own inner conflict. Her anger and pain were intense, but there was a part of her that, deep down, still yearned for a father. The stories Amelie's mother had told her about John before he left kept coming back to her, but the happy memories were constantly overshadowed by the pain of abandonment. Every day was a struggle to move on. At school, Amelie tried to put on a normal front, but inside she felt broken. John's presence was a constant reminder of everything she had lost. The road to reconciliation seemed long and uncertain, and Amelie didn't know if she was ready to forgive. John felt the weight of his responsibilities growing heavier with each passing day as he tried to reconnect with Amelie and Sarah. At the same time, the pressures of business in New York were beginning to threaten the new stability he was trying to build. The constant calls and texts from his company left him feeling torn between two realities. One morning, as he was trying to concentrate on some paperwork in Sarah's small office, the phone rang again. It was his assistant from New York, reporting urgent matters that needed his immediate attention. "Sir, we need you to come in and take care of this. The investors are impatient, and we have a crucial meeting next week," the assistant said with an urgency that John couldn't ignore. He sighed, feeling the pressure building. Business issues were interfering with his ability to connect with Amelie and Sarah. Although he was physically present, his mind often wandered to the company's issues. Amelie, always alert, noticed this distraction and drifted further away. To her, it felt like nothing had changed, that John still cared more about his work than his family. One afternoon, while Sarah was cooking dinner, John tried to talk to Amelie once again. "Amelie, I know things are tough right now, but I'm here for you. I want to be a present father," he said, meaning it. Without even looking at him, Amelie replied coldly, "You say that, but you're always on the phone, solving your business problems. It seems like nothing has changed. You still care more about your work than you do about us." Amelie's words hit John hard. He knew she was right, but he didn't know how to balance the two parts of his life. He felt distant, torn between his family and the responsibilities that awaited him thousands of miles away. John's company in New York seemed miles away, but the truth was that he was also emotionally distant from his daughter, Amelie. Even though he was physically present, the weight of the crisis at his company demanded his full attention, and he spent hours on the phone trying to solve urgent problems. Meanwhile, Amelie and Sarah grew further apart, realizing that John's efforts to reconnect were failing. One morning, Pastor Mako came to visit them and found John exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a worried expression. "John, I see that you are going through a lot. It's not easy to balance it all," the pastor said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. John sighed deeply. "I don't know what to do, Pastor. I'm losing control of my company and my family. It seems like I'm failing in every area," he confessed, his voice thick with frustration. "You don't have to carry it all alone," the pastor said calmly. "There are people willing to help. The community can be a support. Maybe it's time to delegate more responsibility in the company." John knew the pastor was right. He needed to find a way to balance his obligations and show Amelie and Sarah that they were his priority. But how could he do that? That was the big question that consumed him. While he tried to find a way out of the crisis that threatened to collapse everything around him, the situation with his family only got worse. Amelie, who suffered from lupus, continued to face serious health challenges. The constant hospital visits and treatments were a heavy burden, especially for Sarah, who was exhausted and overwhelmed. One night, after a particularly difficult day, Sarah could no longer contain her frustration. John was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, clearly dejected. When Sarah entered the room, her red eyes and the evident fatigue on John's face only intensified what she was feeling. "I can't take it anymore," Sarah began, her voice shaking with emotion. "You have no idea what I've been through all these years alone. I've had to take care of everything on my own, without support, facing the prejudice of being a single mother. John raised his head, his eyes full of guilt. Sarah, I know I messed up. But I'm here now, trying to make things right. With tears in her eyes, Sarah shook her head, struggling to believe that it would be enough. John looked at Sarah, confused. Sarah, I don't understand. It's not just about being here now. I never imagined how much you've been through, he said, trying to find the right words. Sarah, her voice breaking, replied, John, it's not just that. I've never had another relationship because Emily has always needed all my attention. With her health always fragile, I didn't have room for anyone else in my life. John felt a lump in his throat. I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't realize how much you were hurting. Sarah replied bitterly, you were in New York, focused on making money and building your career, while I was here struggling to survive. Every day was a battle alone. John sank deeper into the couch, feeling the guilt crush him. I know nothing I say can change the past, but I'm willing to do anything to help you. Sarah wiped away her tears, but her expression remained stern. Words aren't enough. You need to show that you really care. So far, you seem to only want to solve everything with money. John nodded slowly, understanding the depth of Sarah's despair. I'll show you that I've changed. I'll do whatever it takes. He knew the road to redemption would be long and difficult, and Sarah's words echoed in his mind as painful reminders of the years of suffering. But at the same time, they fueled his determination to make things right. That peaceful night, chaos began. Emily, who seemed to be getting better, suddenly began to feel intense pain and difficulty breathing. Sarah rushed to Amelie's room and found her doubled over in pain, sweating coldly. Desperate, she cried out for John. John rushed to help. Amy, please take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. Sarah tried to calm herself, but the panic was evident in her voice. John lifted Amelie into his arms and carried her quickly to the car. He drove as fast as he could, his mind a whirlwind of fear and guilt. Sarah held Amelie's hand, trying to comfort her, while John kept his eyes fixed on the road. At the hospital, the medical team acted quickly, taking Amelie to the emergency room. John and Sarah were left in the waiting room, each minute feeling like an eternity. Sarah cried silently, and John felt helpless, remembering Sarah's words about how she had faced everything alone. Suddenly, Pastor Mako entered the waiting room. He approached John and Sarah, bringing a message of support. Desperate, Pastor Mako approached John and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. John, in times like these, we need faith. Let's pray together for Amelie, the pastor said calmly. John looked at Pastor Mako, feeling a mixture of despair and disbelief. Pastor, I don't know if I'll ever have faith. I'm not a person of faith and I don't know if I can believe, John murmured. The pastor nodded in understanding. I understand, John, but faith can be a source of strength, especially in difficult times. Let's try together. They knelt in the hospital's small chapel, where Pastor Mako led the prayer. For the first time in years, John tried to connect with something bigger than himself. God, I know I haven't been a man of faith, but I'm here asking for my daughter's life. Please help Amelie, John whispered, his voice choked with emotion. As he prayed, a wave of pent-up emotions rose up. John remembered a secret he'd kept for years, something he'd never told anyone. Pastor, there's something I need to confess, John said, his voice thick with pain. Pastor Mako looked at him, encouraging him to continue. I'm here to listen, John. When I left Sarah, it wasn't just out of ambition. I was running from something. I found out I had a child with another woman before I met Sarah. I was afraid she would find me and discover my new life. I had abandoned my son's mother, and the fear of being discovered made me run away again. Years later, I found out that my son had gotten involved in a gang and died. I carry enormous guilt for that and for everything I did, and that guilt haunts me to this day." Pastor Michael took a deep breath as he listened to John's confession. "John, we all have secrets and regrets. The important thing now is what we do from here. This revelation is a step toward redemption. The fact that you are here, trying to make things right, is a good start," the pastor said, his tone encouraging. John felt a mixture of relief and guilt. He knew his journey to redemption was just beginning, but he felt a new determination to face his mistakes and fight to get his family back. When the doctor finally entered the waiting room with a serious look on his face, John and Sarah immediately stood up. "Emily's condition is stable now, but we'll need to monitor her closely. It was a serious crisis, but she's doing well," the doctor informed, offering a glimmer of hope. Emily finally left the hospital, still weak, but with a shy smile on her face. John helped her walk to the car, and the trip home was uneventful. Sarah felt relieved to see the hospital behind her, even though she knew her recovery would be slow. When they returned home, John and Sarah prepared a comfortable space for Emily to rest. John devoted himself completely to caring for her, preparing her meals, helping with her medications, and spending hours talking every day. On her last day, Emily seemed more receptive and opened up a little more. As Emily rested on the couch, John sat next to her, holding her hand. "Emily, I know things have been hard and there's still a lot to do, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, always." Emily looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion and gratitude. "I know, Dad. I'm starting to understand that." Emily's words filled John's heart with hope. They talked about things they'd never had the chance to share, from John's life in New York to his accomplishments and regrets. Emily talked about her experiences at school and her hopes for the future. Sarah watched from afar, watching the two connect. A wave of emotion hit her as she realized that despite the challenges, the bond between John and Emily was growing stronger. She felt tears streaming down her face, thrilled to see the family reunited again. The journey to reconciliation and healing was just beginning, and each small step was an important step forward. That night, as John and Emily talked in the living room, Sarah joined them and sat next to Emily. John put an arm around Emily and held her hand, forming a circle of love and support. Despite the challenges they still faced, this moment was a sign that they were on the right path. Reconciliation would not be easy and many challenges still lay ahead, but with slow and careful steps, they began to rebuild their lives together. The faith and love that had sustained Sarah began to embrace John as well, creating a new hope for the future. She smiled, feeling at peace for the first time in a long time. Now, with John and Emily by her side, Sarah could see a bright future ahead. She knew that together, they could overcome any obstacle. If you enjoyed this moving story of love and redemption, keep following for more inspiring stories. Like and subscribe, this is very important to us.